99.9% of all Triceratops died that day. The adults, the juveniles, the strong, the fast, the experienced, all gone. But there was one exception, a baby, 3 months old, 200 pounds. No survival skills, no herd, no mother, just luck, or maybe something more. Let me take you back 66 million years, to the very last day of the Cretaceous period. The sun rose that morning like it had risen for millions of mornings before. The world was warm, lush, and teeming with life. Dinosaurs, creatures that had ruled the earth for 165 million years, went about their daily routines with no idea that everything was about to change. In what would one day become North Dakota, a herd of Triceratops moved slowly through a forest of flowering magnolias and giant ferns. 30 individuals, massive adults, weighing up to 12 tons, their 3-horned skulls and elaborate frills making them unmistakable even from a distance. Among them was a baby. We'll call her Hope. Hope was 3 months old, small by Triceratops standards, just 200 pounds, about the size of a large pig. Her frill was still developing, soft and flexible. Her horns were barely nubs. She stayed close to her mother, a massive female who had survived 40 years in a world filled with predators, natural disasters, and constant competition for resources. Hope's mother was experienced, wise, strong. She had raised 7 offspring before Hope. 5 had survived to adulthood. Those were good odds in the late Cretaceous. But this morning would be different. This morning, the rules would change. Hope nursed briefly, then wandered a few feet away to investigate an interesting-looking cycad plant. Her mother watched carefully, as she always did. The forest was relatively safe during the day, but a baby Triceratops was vulnerable to so many threats. Dakota raptors, Tyrannosaurus juveniles, even aggressive males from rival herds. Hope nibbled at the cycad, finding it bitter and unpleasant. She snorted and returned to her mother's side. And that's when the sky changed. At first, it was just a bright streak, a shooting star, visible even in daylight. The herd barely noticed. Shooting stars were common, nothing to fear. But this one didn't fade. It grew brighter, and brighter, and brighter, until it looked like a second sun, blazing across the sky from the southeast. The Chicxulub asteroid, 6 miles wide, traveling at 45,000 miles per hour, had entered Earth's atmosphere. Hope's mother looked up. Her instincts, honed over 40 years, screamed danger. She didn't understand what she was seeing. No creature on Earth could have understood. But she knew, in that deep, primal way that all animals know when something is terribly wrong. She lowered her head and nudged Hope toward a rocky outcrop about 50 meters away. A small overhang, barely large enough for 2 Triceratops. Hope resisted. She was hungry. She wanted to eat, not hide. Her mother nudged harder, more insistent. And then, impact. 800 miles away, the asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula with the force of 10 billion atomic bombs. The impact crater, over 110 miles wide, formed in less than a second. Rock vaporized instantly. The Earth's crust rippled like water. A fireball hotter than the sun's surface expanded outward at supersonic speed. But Hope didn't know any of that. All she knew was that her mother suddenly shoved her beneath the rocky overhang with terrifying force, and then positioned her own massive body, 12 tons of muscle, bone, and protective instinct, over the entrance. Hope squealed in protest. It was dark under here, cramped. She couldn't see her herd, couldn't see the sky. Her mother didn't move, just stood there, her enormous frill covering most of the overhang entrance, her body blocking the rest. Outside, the herd was panicking. They could feel it now, a deep rumble building in the earth, a sound like nothing they had ever heard, a roar that seemed to come from the planet itself. And then, the shockwave hit. The blast wave, traveling at thousands of miles per hour, arrived first. Trees didn't just fall, they exploded. Entire forests were leveled in seconds. massive trunks snapping like twigs. The Triceratops herd tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The shockwave was everywhere, all at once. Adult Triceratops weighing 12 tons were lifted and thrown like toys. Bodies tumbled through the air, crashing into each other, into trees, into the ground. Bones shattered, skulls cracked. The sound was indescribable, a combination of thunder, tornado, and earthquake, all happening simultaneously. Hope's mother braced herself against the rock. Her massive legs, built to support 12 tons and withstand charges from Tyrannosaurus, dug into the earth. Her frill, designed to deflect predator bites, now acted as a shield against the debris-filled wind. The shockwave hit her like a physical wall. Her body lifted slightly, then slammed back down. Rock fragments, tree branches, and superheated air pounded against her frill and back. Pain shot through her body as debris tore into her hide. But she didn't move. Beneath her, Hope felt the world shaking, heard the roar, smelled something burning. She was terrified, crying out for her mother. But the noise was so loud, she couldn't even hear her own voice. The shockwave lasted maybe 30 seconds. But those 30 seconds killed everything in the immediate area that wasn't protected. When it finally passed, Hope's mother was still standing, badly wounded, bleeding from dozens of cuts, where debris had torn through her thick hide, but standing. She took one step forward, preparing to check on Hope. And then the fire came. The impact had ejected trillions of tons of superheated debris into the upper atmosphere. What goes up must come down. And now it was coming down. Everywhere, all at once, molten rock, vaporized asteroid, superheated glass. All of it began to rain from the sky like a storm of meteors, each one burning at temperatures over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The sky itself seemed to be on fire. Hope's mother looked up and saw hell descending. She had seconds to make a choice: run and maybe survive, or stay and protect her baby. She chose to stay. She lowered her massive head, tucked her body as tightly as possible over the overhang, and waited. The firestorm struck. Burning debris hit her back, her frill, her head. Her thick hide, designed to protect against predator bites, offered some protection, but not enough. Not against this. The temperature rose rapidly. 200 degrees, 400 degrees, 600 degrees. Hope's mother was being cooked alive. She bellowed in agony, a sound Hope would remember for the rest of her short life. But still, she didn't move. Beneath her, in the small pocket of space created by the overhang and her mother's body, Hope was spared the worst of it. The temperature rose, yes. It was hot. Uncomfortably hot, but survivable. The firestorm lasted for hours. By the time it finally ended, 70% of all forests on Earth had burned. Trillions of animals had died. The sky was choked with smoke and ash so thick that sunlight couldn't penetrate. And Hope's mother was dead. She had died standing up, her body still positioned protectively over the overhang. Her hide was charred, her frill cracked from the heat. But even in death, she was shielding her baby. Hope didn't understand death yet. She just knew her mother wasn't moving, wasn't responding to her calls. She nudged the massive leg, confused, scared, alone, but alive. The first night was the worst. Hope crawled out from beneath her mother's body and immediately wished she hadn't. The world outside was unrecognizable. What had been a lush forest was now a smoking wasteland. Charred tree trunks jutted from the ground like skeletal fingers. The ground was covered in ash. The air reeked of burning flesh and wood. And it was dark. So dark. The impact had thrown so much debris into the atmosphere that it blocked out the sun. The temperature, which had been in the 70s that morning, had already dropped to the 40s, and it would keep dropping. Hope was cold, hungry, terrified. She called out for the herd, but there was no answer. Just eerie silence, broken occasionally by the crash of a falling tree or the distant rumble of ongoing seismic activity. She tried to nurse from her mother, but her mother's body was already cooling. Hope didn't understand why the milk wasn't coming. She spent that first night huddled against her mother's corpse, the residual warmth from the fire-damaged hide providing some comfort. By morning, though it barely looked like morning, with the sun obscured by ash, Hope was desperately hungry. Triceratops were herbivores, specialized feeders who ate tough, fibrous vegetation. At 3 months old, Hope was still primarily nursing, but she had started to experiment with plants. Her mother had shown her which ones were safe, which ones were nutritious. But all the plants were gone, burned, dead, covered in toxic ash. Hope wandered through the devastation, searching for anything green, anything alive. She found nothing. On the second day, it started to rain. Not normal rain, acidic rain, contaminated by the massive amounts of sulfur dioxide released by the impact. It burned Hope's skin where it touched her. She quickly learned to stay under cover, beneath her mother's body, or under the few remaining rock overhangs. On the third day, she found water, a small stream, choked with ash, but still flowing. She drank desperately, not knowing the water was contaminated with heavy metals and toxins from the impact. It made her sick, violently sick. For 2 days, she could barely move, her small body racked with vomiting and diarrhea. She should have died then. A baby Triceratops, alone, poisoned, starving, in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. The odds of survival were essentially zero, but somehow, she didn't die. On the 6th day, she found food. Not much, just a small patch of ferns that had somehow survived, protected in a low-lying area where ash hadn't accumulated as heavily. The ferns were damaged, wilted, but alive. Hope ate frantically, stripping the plants bare in minutes. It wasn't nearly enough to sustain her, but it was something. A small spark of hope in the darkness. Over the following weeks, Hope developed a pattern. She would spend her days searching for tiny pockets of surviving vegetation. A bush here, a cycad there. Moss growing on rocks. Anything organic that hadn't burned. She learned to dig, using her small developing horns and powerful legs to excavate roots and tubers buried beneath the ash. Adult Triceratops didn't do this. They didn't need to. But Hope had no choice. She learned to avoid the acidic rain, the toxic pools, the unstable ground where the earthquake had created sinkholes. She learned to be quiet because there were predators still alive. Desperate, starving predators who would gladly eat a baby Triceratops. She had several close calls. A juvenile Tyrannosaurus, itself starving and injured, found her scent one day and tracked her for hours. Hope hid in a narrow crevice between rocks, too small for the predator to reach. The Tyrannosaurus waited for 3 hours before finally giving up. Another time, a pack of Dakota raptors cornered her near a dried stream bed. But Hope had grown since the impact. She was bigger now, heavier, and her horns were developing. When the lead raptor lunged, Hope charged. A clumsy, instinct-driven attack that caught the raptor off guard. Her horn caught the predator in the leg, drawing blood. The pack hesitated, reassessed, and decided this prey wasn't worth the risk. Hope survived, week after week, month after month. The ash gradually settled. The temperature stabilized, though much colder than before. The rains became less acidic. And slowly, incredibly slowly, life began to return. Small plants first, opportunistic species that could grow in disturbed soil. Then insects, then small mammals. The ecosystem was rebuilding itself, but it would take thousands of years to even approach what it had been before. And it would never include dinosaurs. Hope lived for 3 years after the impact. She never found another Triceratops. She was, quite possibly, the last of her species, at least in this region. She grew, despite the harsh conditions. By age 3, she weighed about 2,000 pounds, small for a Triceratops her age, malnourished and stunted, but alive. She developed behaviors that were unusual for her species. She was more solitary, more aggressive, more adaptable than normal Triceratops, because she had to be. She learned to eat plants that Triceratops normally avoided, toxic plants that she could tolerate in small amounts because she had no other choice. She learned to defend herself against predators much larger than her, using her growing horns and her willingness to fight rather than flee. She was a survivor in the truest sense. But evolution is cruel. The post-impact world wasn't sustainable for large dinosaurs. The food chains had collapsed. The plant species that large herbivores needed were gone or drastically reduced. The temperature fluctuations were too extreme. In the 3rd year after the impact, Hope began to struggle. Food became scarcer, as even the opportunistic plants died off during a particularly harsh winter. Her body, already stressed from years of malnutrition, began to fail. She developed an infection in her left front leg, probably from an injury sustained during a fight with a predator. Without a herd, without proper nutrition, her immune system couldn't fight it off. The infection spread. Her leg swelled. Walking became painful, then impossible. Hope found a sheltered area beneath a rock overhang, not unlike the one that had saved her 3 years earlier. She lay down, and she didn't get up again. She died quietly, alone, on a cold morning, as the sun, still dimmed by atmospheric ash, struggled to break through the clouds. She was 3 years and 2 months old. For a Triceratops, she should have lived to be 30 or more. But she had lived longer than 99.9% of her species. She had survived the unsurvivable. She had been the exception. 66 million years later, a team of paleontologists working in North Dakota uncovered an unusual fossil, a Triceratops, small, juvenile, but with distinct growth markers in the bones that indicated it had survived for years in harsh conditions. Stress lines in the bone structure, evidence of malnutrition, healed fractures from predator encounters, and most intriguing of all, the geological layer where it was found indicated it had died 3 years after the KT boundary, 3 years after the asteroid impact. The discovery was published in a major paleontology journal. Scientists debated what it meant. How had this juvenile survived when almost everything else died? What did it eat? How did it avoid predators? Some suggested it might have been protected in a microclimate, an area less affected by the impact. Others proposed it had found a previously unknown food source. They named the specimen Hope, because that's what it represented. Hope in the face of apocalypse, survival against impossible odds, the resilience of life itself. They put Hope's bones in a museum, mounted the skeleton in a dynamic pose, head lowered, horns forward, ready to charge, ready to fight. And every year, millions of people walk past that skeleton. Children press their faces against the glass, amazed by the 3-horned dinosaur. Adults read the placard, learning about the KT extinction. But very few truly understand what they're looking at. They're not just seeing bones. They're seeing courage, resilience, the will to survive. They're seeing a baby who lost everything and chose to keep going anyway. They're seeing hope. The KT extinction killed approximately 75% of all species on Earth. The non-avian dinosaurs were completely wiped out. Giant marine reptiles, flying pterosaurs, countless plant and animal species. But life survived. Small mammals hiding in burrows survived. Birds survived. Fish survived. Insects survived. Plants with resilient seeds survived. and they inherited the world the dinosaurs left behind. Over the next 66 million years, those survivors evolved, diversified, filled the ecological niches that the dinosaurs had once occupied. Small, shrew-like mammals evolved into everything from whales to elephants to humans. Dinosaurs, in a sense, evolved too, through their avian descendants. Birds are living dinosaurs, carrying the genetic legacy of creatures like Triceratops and T-Rex into the modern world. Hope didn't have offspring. Her genes didn't continue. But her story, her survival, represents something important. It represents the fact that even in the darkest moments, even when all seems lost, life finds a way. Not always. Not for everyone. 99.9% of Triceratops died that day, and they didn't come back. But that 0.1%, they mattered. Because survival isn't about being the strongest, or the fastest, or the smartest. Sometimes, it's just about being in the right place at the right time. Having a mother who loved you enough to die protecting you. Being small enough to fit in a space that larger animals couldn't. Being adaptable enough to eat plants that others wouldn't. Sometimes, survival is just luck. But sometimes, when you look closer, you realize it's more than luck. It's will. It's instinct. It's the fundamental drive that exists in all living things, the drive to continue, to persist, to survive. Hope had that drive. And for 3 years, against all odds, it was enough. Today, if you visit the North Dakota Heritage Center and State Museum, you can see Hope's skeleton. It's not the largest Triceratops specimen, not the most complete, not the most impressive, but it might be the most important. Because Hope's bones tell a story that no other fossil can tell. They tell the story of the day the world ended, and the baby who survived it. They tell us that even in apocalypse, there is hope. They tell us that life, however fragile, is also remarkably resilient. They tell us that endings are also beginnings. The age of dinosaurs ended that day, but the age of mammals began. The age of birds began. Ultimately, the age of humans began. All because a few creatures survived, a few exceptions to the rule, a few individuals who were in the right place, at the right time, with the right adaptations and the right amount of luck. Hope was one of them. She didn't know she was part of history, didn't know she would be remembered 66 million years later, didn't know her bones would teach humans, a species that wouldn't exist for another 65 million years, about resilience and survival. She just knew she was hungry and scared and alone. But she kept going anyway, day after day, week after week, year after year, until she couldn't anymore. And that, more than anything else, is what makes her story matter. Because we all face our own extinctions, our own personal apocalypses. Moments when everything we knew is gone, when the world has changed beyond recognition, when survival seems impossible. And in those moments, we have a choice. Give up or keep going. 99.9% of Triceratops didn't make it past that first day. But Hope did. Not because she was special, not because she was stronger or smarter or more deserving, but because she had a mother who loved her. And because, when everything else was gone, she chose to survive. One day at a time, until there were no more days left. And sometimes, that's all any of us can do. Survive, persist, hope. Even when the sky is on fire, even when the world has ended, even when you're alone, you keep going. Because that's what life does. It persists, it survives, it hopes,